If you are like me and many other people I know, you have boxes and bins and bags of scrap fabric. So these are some of the varied scraps that I have from my Happy at Home fabric collection from Riley Blake Designs in all sorts of sizes. So what to do with these? I've like a few extra from a 5-inch stacker. Well, I love this scrap tape from the Gypsy Quilter. It is basically a wash away foundation that stabilizes your fabric, and it's 2.5 inches wide. So if you're wondering at any point during this video why I am doing this, especially since I do this project pretty straight, and you're like, Tara, why are you doing this process? Why are you adding this stabilizer? What this stabilizer does is it allows you to just do whatever you want with your fabric and not have to worry about the grain. You don't have to worry about what direction the fibers are going, if you're going with the grain and across the grain or even diagonal. This is especially helpful if you're doing things at funny angles, because if you start sewing at funny angles, your fabric might start stretching and warping a little bit. But when you're doing it onto this, it's going to hold all these threads in the grain so that you can do whatever you want and leave all the stabilizing to the scrap tape. So this is a great way to make binding, to make cute 2.5-inch strips that you could put on a little zipper bag, something super simple just to make it cuter, put it on a tote bag, whatever you want and however you want to use 2.5-inch strips. Now I'm going to try not to be a perfectionist about this, even though that's often my way. I'm going to keep a pair of scissors by the sewing machine. So if I want to cut something a little bit shorter and I'm just going to grab scraps, the first one I'm going to put face up and I'm just going to sew it onto the scrap tape. Some of my scraps are exactly 2.5 inches wide, so that's perfect. I'm just going to tack the first one down. Then I'm just going to pick the second one and I'm going to decide, like, do I want it to be that long? I think I want this one to be a little bit skinnier. I'm going to put it face down. And I am using a shorter stitch length, the 1.8, so that this stays nice. Now I'm just going to flip it and I'm just going to finger press it. If you have one of those roller things, you can use that. You can use the edge of a ruler if you want to make sure that really stays down. You can also put a little stitch if you want it to be more decorative. To see how that gives almost like a quilted finished look. You may or may not want to do that depending on how you're going to be using your fabric scrap strip that you make. I'm not sure what we are supposed to call it. Let's see. But let's just add some pieces and decide. Once you have that first piece down, you don't have to worry about going over the stitching because I'm stitching both this side and this at the same time. And I just do this right at my sewing machine. And because this is really long, I'm just going to cut this. Just make sure you cut it bigger than this because you're going to trim everything at the end. So it doesn't matter that the sizes are all different. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different here because I like the selvage. I like kind of that fringe and I want to keep that on there. So what I'm going to do, instead of doing right sides together and flipping, I'm just going to sneak the raw edge of this one underneath the fringe of the selvage and I'm going to sew. And then this one, I'll go back to right sides together, stitch and flip. For this one, I'm going to be a little bit fussy about what is going to make the strip because I want these two cute little birds to be on the strip and I want them to be lined up with the strip. So I'm going to place them down where they need to be. And this is just from an extra 5-inch square that I have. And before I sew, I'm going to make sure that it's going to flip correctly. So I'm just going to kind of hold my finger there, flip that, and make sure those birds land where I want them on that strip, which they do. So now I'm just going to sew them on. So you'll notice that made a different angle. So everything I've done so far has been straight and that put kind of a fun little angle. But if you don't want it to be a fun little angle and you want it to be straight, you can just flip it back and sew it straight compared to one of the straightly sewn things. Okay, so you can see here, this one's sewn at an angle because I sewed parallel to the edge of the fabric. This one is sewn, it looks like an angle to the fabric, but it's actually sewn parallel to all of the other lines that I've sewn. So now when I flip that, we're continuing with our regular stripes. You just want to keep unrolling the strip and kind of flatten it as you're adding the fabric. So this is another one where I love the selvage with the cute little birds to coordinate with the fabric. So I want to keep that showing. And just like the last time we did selvage, we're just going to sneak that raw edge under and keep this right sides up. We'll fold that down and then we're going to stitch that on. Now, if you're doing this for binding, like say you're going to be binding a larger quilt, then you would want to start using some longer strips so that this doesn't take forever to make. But if you're doing something smaller or simple, or you're going to be using it as a decorative accent, say in a zipper bag or a tote bag, then you can just keep going and make cute little stripes. You want to think about what you're doing in the end and how long you really want this process to take. You can even use oddly shaped scraps as long as you make sure the part that's sewn is going to cover the strip or be covered by the next piece of fabric. Now, if you do have directional fabric, like I have some of these birds, and remember we put this bird facing that direction. So I want to make sure that when I do these, they're going to be going in the same direction. So this is definitely an easier project to do with non-directional fabric, but if you just think about it, you can make sure you have everything going in the correct direction. So now we are going to trim this to be 2.5 inches all the way along. And I'm going to trim it with the scrap tape facing up to make sure we're keeping the scrap tape on the fabric. And it's not perfectly straight, but it is straight enough that we can make this work. I'm going to go down one side and then the other. So how would you use this? Like if you're looking at this, what are you inspired to do? Are you going to use it for something decorative? Are you going to use it for like scrappy binding? What do you think? Leave me a comment and let me know what your plan is. So now that we have one side straight, I'm just going to be cutting 2.5 inches from that side all the way along the strip.